in Normandy. And it was kind of like, oh, okay, that makes perfect sense. And they quit asking questions. And so I'm going, this is awesome, right? You know. And so, I mean, literally, you can ask Shell. I did this for months. And finally, somebody was there, and they heard me say it, and they laughed, and it was like a light bulb went off in Preston's head, like, that's not true, you know. and it ceased to work from that point on. And so then we simplified it. He would just answer me a question, and I would just look at him and say, "Aardvark," and he just bust out laughing. Well, that's continued on with everything else, and now Clint has, it never worked on Clint it was always the aardvarks doing something. Well, Clint has figured out that that's a joke, and so Clint has now gotten to the verbal stage where he is asking questions and running on this kind of stuff. And so I told Sheldon, I said, I'm just going to start answering them with walrus. And that's been our, thing. Why is the sky blue, or whatever at the end of the litany of questions, and I just look at it and say, walrus. So this morning before church, we're sitting here eating breakfast, and Clint asks me a question about, I think something about his bed, and I said, well, what do you want to do about that? And Clint looks at it and says, walrus. And I said, I have been beaten by a 2-year-old. Mental intelligence. But if you were to walk into our house during that conversation, you would be looking at it and going, huh? Right? And as I thought about that, and thought about the confusion of the conversation in the household at times, sometimes our prayers and questions to God, and we say, God, why this? Why is it happening like this? Why does it look like this? And it's as if God looks at us and says, walrus. You guys ever been there? There's a character in the book of John, chapter 9, starting verse 1, that I think probably had lots of those kind of questions. John chapter 9, starting verse 1, says this: as he passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. This is Jesus. He sees a man blind from birth, and his disciples ask him a very specific why question. Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he would be born blind? Now, I understand this passage, and let me help you out, just unpack this for a second. These guys were asking a very Jewish question. They had a mindset and understanding of Old Testament law, which was a basic cause and effect kind of law. If you honor God and follow God, then blessing happens. If you disobey God and go against God's law, then cursings happen. And that was a very Jewish system that was set up under the Old Covenant system, and it was this very, logical, everything made sense. And so these guys were just asking Jesus as the teacher this logical understanding. They're trying to go through life and make sense of the confusion. And so they find this man, and they say, Jesus, or teacher, who sinned? Did this man's parents sin, and now his physical ailments are a direct result, cause, a symptom of his parents' sin? Or was this something that was a much broader metaphysical thing about him and his sin and his sinfulness that caused his blindness? You see their confusion. They're trying to seek for a good answer, and they're kind of confused. And Jesus answered them, and he says this: it was neither that this man sinned or his parents, but it was so that the works of God might be displayed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me, as long as it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world. When he had said this, he spat on the ground, and he made clay out of the spittle and applied the clay to the eyes. And he said to him, go and wash in the pool of Siloam, which is translated sent. So he went away and washed, and he came back seeing. Therefore the neighbors of those who had previously saw him as a beggar were saying, is not this the one who used to sit and beg? And others were saying, this is he. Still others were saying, no, but he is like him. He kept saying, I am the one. So they were saying to him, how then were your eyes opened? And he answered, the man who who is called Jesus, made clay, anointed my eyes, and he said to me, go to Siloam to wash. So I went away, and I received sight. They said to him, where is he? And he said, I don't know. This is a very interesting story to me. It's always been an interesting story to me. That was recorded for us as just a small snapshot picture of the earthly ministry of Jesus. And so you get a picture of Jesus walking through life, teaching his disciples, doing what a good rabbi was supposed to do. And he comes upon this man who is born blind, right? It's like a chance happening. It wasn't orchestrated, it wasn't planned out, it wasn't, thought through as far as, they said, hey, we're going to go to this town and find this man and see where he is and engage in him in this kind of manner. It was like, he just decided, hey, let's go for a walk through downtown Lafayette. And he's walking through downtown Lafayette, and there just happens to be a guy there on the side of the road. And they just stumble on him. It's that kind of an encounter. And so his disciples, looking at this, they're trying to look through life, logically speaking, cause and effect, everything happens for a purpose, and all these kind of things. And so here's this man that was born blind, and they see him on the side of the road and say, Jesus, what happened here? Did his parents sin? Did he sin? Why is he like this? And Jesus looks at him and basically says, you're confused. He is like this so that God's glory, God's work might be displayed in him. Now this is, the disciples are obviously very confused about this because they're trying to think through this. They're trying to be very rational about this. They're trying to understand this. But they're not the characters that I want to look at. No, the character that I want to look at is this blind guy. I mean, think about this with me, okay? It says that he's a blind man. And he was born blind. He's been blind from birth. Man, not like he got blind like last weekend. He's been blind his whole life. And in the culture of Jesus, there was no welfare system. This was the option of a blind person. You sat and begged. That's what your job was. And so this man probably from very, very early on sat and begged as his role in life. Now you can obviously sit and try to put yourself in his position and look through what it was that he was going through and think about the thought process that must have gone through his life. But if you've ever endured some kind of physical ailment or some kind of accident that's happened in your body, or something's going on with your back, or you had a major sickness, or something physically has happened to you, and it messed with your world, it messed with your life in some capacity, and you just have this thought, why me? How did this apply to me? And it just doesn't seem to make sense. And so for this man to be actually considered a man in Jewish culture, he had to be over the age of 30. So here's this guy, for 30 years he's been blind. And he's living life in this manner that just doesn't make sense. And here this guy just happens upon him. And I always find this really interesting because if you ever read the scripture through and look specifically at Jesus' miracles, Jesus healed lots of blind guys. He never healed anyone the same way. And so, I find that it's one of the questions I had to ask Jesus one day is like, all right, so you walk up on the blind guy and you go, okay, I'm going to heal him. I'm going to hock a loogie into the dirt, stir it up, and smear it on his eyes. That's what I'm going to do. Out of all the things that Jesus could have done, I'm going, that's just kind of different, right? And so again, it just doesn't seem to make sense, but that's what he does. And so I imagine for this guy sitting down in the dirt, he probably hears people talking about Jesus because Jesus was pretty well known. And Jesus stops up on him and he sees him, and it doesn't even say that there's actually a dialogue that happens prior to it. Most of the time when Jesus encounters people like this, he basically says, what do you want me to do for you? How do you want me to? He doesn't say anything. He just chances up on the guy and sees him and he has a dialogue with his disciples. He spits on the ground. And imagine that, right? You're sitting there, like, you don't see nothing. And then all of a sudden you hear somebody go, and then you feel stuff on your eyes, right? Like, that's a kind of a freaky experience, I would think. Like, if that happened